He walked into his own bank branch to sign routine paperwork, dressed down in a simple gray hoodie and jeans on his rare day off. Not long afterward, he was pinned against the cold marble floor by a rogue police officer whose prejudice had completely blinded him to reality. What Officer Bexley didn't know was that the man he was illegally detaining wasn't just a customer. He owned the building, the vault, and the payroll. One phone call was about to end Bexley's decades-long career. The crisp autumn wind whipped through the affluent streets of Westfield, New Jersey, carrying the scent of fallen oak leaves and expensive dark roast coffee. It was a quiet weekend morning, the kind of quiet, slow-paced weekend day where the town's elite traded their tailored Italian suits for high-end athleisure wear, strolling past boutique shops and manicured parks. Malcolm Sterling fit right in, yet paradoxically stood entirely apart. Malcolm was a man who had built an empire from the ground up. Raised in a working-class neighborhood just 2 towns over, he had spent many years ruthlessly and brilliantly climbing the financial sector's ladder. Several years earlier, he had orchestrated the massive buyout of Harbor Trust and Company, a regional bank that had been struggling. Under his leadership as CEO and majority shareholder, Harbor Trust had become a financial juggernaut, boasting over 50 branches across the tri-state area. But Malcolm did not look like a CEO that morning. He was a man who valued his weekends. Having just finished a grueling 6-mile run, he was dressed in a faded, comfortably worn gray athletic hoodie, dark denim jeans, and a pair of scuffed running shoes. He had left his wallet in his SUV, carrying only his car keys and his smartphone. He just needed to pop into the flagship Westfield branch to sign off on a stack of urgent compliance documents that the branch manager, Camille Prescott, had prepared for an upcoming federal audit. The Westfield branch of Harbor Trust and Company was an architectural marvel, blending historic banking grandeur with modern minimalist design. High vaulted ceilings, polished imported Italian marble floors, and teller stations encased in crystal clear bullet-resistant glass completed the space. As Malcolm pulled open the heavy brass doors, the warm air of the lobby hit him. It was relatively quiet. Only 3 customers were in the teller line. They were older locals depositing checks or asking about CD rates. Near the front entrance, Officer Warren Bexley leaned against a high-top mahogany writing desk. Bexley was a longtime veteran of the local police department. He was a large, imposing man with a thick neck, graying hair cropped in a strict military fade, and a demeanor that suggested the world owed him a debt that was long overdue. He was working an off-duty security detail for the bank, a cushy assignment that paid time and a half and allowed him to stand in air-conditioned comfort, drink free premium coffee, and assert his authority over anyone who looked at him the wrong way. Bexley had a reputation in the department. He was a relic of an older, much uglier era of policing. He had a file of civilian complaints thicker than a phone book, mostly for harassment, excessive force, and racial profiling, but a strong police union and a series of sympathetic old-school supervisors had always managed to sweep his indiscretions under the rug. Bexley saw the world in rigid categories. He had already decided who belonged in Westfield and who did not. Malcolm walked past Bexley without a second glance, his mind preoccupied with the upcoming audit and the approaching quarterly earnings call. He bypassed the velvet ropes of the main teller line entirely. As the CEO, he knew the layout intimately. To the right of the teller station stood a frosted glass door that read Private Banking and Management. It led directly to Camille Prescott's office and the secure back rooms. Bexley's eyes locked onto Malcolm immediately. The officer's posture stiffened, and his hand instinctively settled on his duty belt. In Bexley's mind, the story wrote itself at once. A tall, athletic black man in a hooded sweatshirt and worn sneakers had just entered one of the wealthiest banks in the county, bypassed the line, and headed straight toward a restricted employee area. Bexley didn't see a local resident. He certainly didn't see a CEO. He saw a threat. He saw a stereotype. Most of all, he saw an opportunity to exercise the absolute power he felt he was entitled to. Bexley's voice cracked across the quiet lobby, echoing off the marble walls. "Hey, you, hold it right there." Malcolm paused, his hand resting on the brushed steel handle of the frosted glass door. He turned around slowly, his expression neutral, accustomed to the weight of command, but not immediately recognizing the hostility directed at him. He looked at the officer, waiting for him to speak. "Step away from the door," Bexley commanded, closing the distance between them with heavy, deliberate footsteps. The leather of his gun belt creaked in the sudden silence of the lobby. The few customers in the teller line turned their heads, conversations dying instantly. "Can I help you, officer?" Malcolm asked, his voice calm and measured, carrying the even, resonant tone he used during high-stakes board meetings. "I'm the one helping you," Bexley sneered, stopping close enough to invade Malcolm's personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm going into the back office," Malcolm replied evenly. "I have a meeting with Camille Prescott." Bexley's eyes narrowed, scanning Malcolm from the hood of his sweatshirt down to his scuffed sneakers. A contemptuous smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Camille Prescott, the branch manager?" Bexley said. "You have a meeting with the branch manager on your day off, dressed like you just rolled out of an alley?" Malcolm felt the familiar, ugly sting of prejudice, a ghost he had fought all his life, one that wealth and status were supposed to shield him from, but never truly could. He took a slow breath, deciding to handle this with the quiet dignity he was known for. "Yes," Malcolm said. "She's expecting me. Now, if you'll excuse me." He turned back toward the door, pulling the handle. That was Bexley's breaking point. No one turned their back on him. No one dismissed him. "I said hold it!" Bexley snapped, his voice rising to a shout. Bexley lunged forward, his heavy hand clamping down hard on Malcolm's left shoulder, yanking him backward away from the glass door. Malcolm stumbled half a step, but instantly steadied himself, his core tightening. His eyes, previously calm, now flashed with a cold, hardened warning. "Remove your hand from me, officer, right now." The sheer authority in Malcolm's voice startled Bexley for a moment. It was neither the panicked defense of a criminal nor the nervous compliance of an intimidated civilian. It was an order delivered by a man completely unaccustomed to being touched or questioned, but Bexley's ego violently rejected the tone. "You don't give the orders here, pal," Bexley hissed, stepping closer, his face turning a mottled red. "You are attempting to bypass security and enter a restricted area of a financial institution. I want to see your ID now." Behind the teller stations, a newly hired teller named Tessa Monroe watched with wide, terrified eyes. She had been working at Harbor Trust for only a short time. She had never met the CEO. She only knew his name from the glossy welcome packets she'd been given when she started. Seeing a police officer physically grab a man in the lobby sent her into a panic. She instinctively hovered her hand over the silent alarm button beneath her desk, but hesitated, uncertain what protocol required. "I don't have my wallet with me," Malcolm said, his voice dropping an octave, perfectly controlled but edged with danger. "I left it in my car, but as I just told you, Camille Prescott is expecting me. If you simply let me knock on her door or call her out here, this will be cleared up immediately." "Oh, you left it in your car?" Bexley mocked, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. He wanted an audience. He wanted to humiliate the man. How convenient. A man walks into a bank with no ID wearing a hoodie and tries to force his way into the vault area. "You think I'm stupid?" "I think," Malcolm said, holding Bexley's gaze without blinking, "that you are making an incredibly serious mistake and that the bias driving your actions is going to cost you your badge." Bexley's jaw clenched. The threat to his badge hit the exact nerve Malcolm intended to strike. The officer's hand dropped to his utility belt, unclipping his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back," Bexley barked. Malcolm didn't move. "I have committed no crime. You have no reasonable, articulable suspicion to detain me, let alone arrest me. I am telling you for the final time to call Camille Prescott." Malcolm reached into his front hoodie pocket, intending to pull out his smartphone to dial Camille himself. "He's reaching!" Bexley yelled, though he was the only one escalating. In a flash of unwarranted violence, Bexley shoved Malcolm against the polished mahogany writing desk. The heavy wood drove painfully into Malcolm's ribs. Before Malcolm could react, Bexley grabbed his right arm, twisted it painfully behind his back, and slammed his weight into Malcolm, pinning him against the desk. Gasps erupted from the customers in the lobby. An elderly woman clutched her purse to her chest, stepping backward toward the exit. "Do not resist. Stop resisting," Bexley shouted, reciting the practiced mantra of a corrupt officer manufacturing an alibi for his own brutality. Malcolm wasn't resisting. He was an incredibly fit man, entirely capable of throwing the overweight officer off him, but he was also a black man in America. He knew the lethal consequences of fighting back, even when entirely in the right. He went completely limp, allowing his body to be manhandled to deny Bexley any excuse to draw his weapon. "I am not resisting," Malcolm stated loudly, ensuring the tellers and the security cameras capturing the lobby picked up his clear, unpanicked voice. I am fully compliant. You are assaulting me. Click, click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit viciously into Malcolm's wrists. Bexley wrenched the cuffs up, pulling a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain from Malcolm's lips. You're under arrest, Bexley spat, yanking Malcolm away from the desk and shoving him toward the center of the lobby. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. Bexley forced Malcolm to his knees on the hard marble floor. The sheer indignity of it, being forced to kneel in the center of the institution he had built, treated like a common criminal by a man intoxicated by a tiny sliver of power, burned like acid in Malcolm's chest. But beneath the humiliation, a cold, calculating fury was solidifying. Malcolm Sterling did not get angry. He got even, and he was about to dismantle Officer Warren Bexley's life completely. Bexley reached for the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have one male suspect in custody at the Harbor Trust branch on Broad Street. Suspect attempted unauthorized entry into a secure bank area and actively resisted. Send a transport unit. Unit 4, copy. Transport is en route. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Bexley looked down at Malcolm with an ugly, victorious smirk. You picked the wrong town, buddy. We don't tolerate your kind of nonsense in Westfield. Malcolm looked up at him, his face an unreadable mask of stone. You have absolutely no idea what you've just done. The heavy, frosted glass door labeled Private Banking and Management finally swung open. Camille Prescott, a sharp, impeccably dressed professional, walked out holding a thick manila folder of compliance documents. She had been on a conference call in the vault room and hadn't heard the initial shouting. Tessa, did Mr. Sterling arrive? Camille started to ask the new teller, her eyes scanning the room. She stopped dead in her tracks. The manila folder slipped from her fingers, its pages scattering across the marble floor with a sharp slap. Her eyes darted from the terrified customers to Officer Bexley's aggressive posture, then finally to the man kneeling on the floor in handcuffs. Malcolm, Camille gasped, the blood draining from her face so quickly that she felt dizzy. Good morning, Camille, Malcolm said from his knees, his voice remarkably steady despite his arms being pulled painfully taut behind him. Apologies for the scene. Bexley looked toward the branch manager, puffing out his chest and completely misreading her horror. It's all right, Miss Prescott. I've got the situation under control. This individual was attempting to breach your office area. He refused to show ID and became combative. Camille stared at Bexley as if he had just sprouted a second head. For a moment, she was completely paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of what she was witnessing. Then the paralysis gave way to a volcanic, protective rage. Are you out of your mind? Camille screamed, her voice cracking like a whip across the silent lobby. She marched forward, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble. Take those handcuffs off him right now. Bexley blinked, momentarily thrown. Ma'am, step back. This is an active crime scene. This man is a suspect. This man is Malcolm Sterling, Camille yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Malcolm, then thrusting it toward Bexley's face. He is the chief executive officer of Harbor Trust. He owns this bank, he owns this building, and he pays your damn salary for this security detail. Take the cuffs off. The words struck the lobby like a physical shockwave. The elderly woman near the door gasped. Tessa, the teller, covered her mouth with both hands. Officer Bexley froze. The smug, authoritative mask on his face shattered, replaced instantly by the pale, sickening realization of catastrophic error. His eyes darted down to Malcolm, who was staring back at him with an expression of absolute, terrifying calm. He didn't have ID, Bexley stammered, his booming voice suddenly shrinking into a pathetic croak. He instinctively took a half step backward. He was wearing a hoodie. He didn't look like a CEO. He didn't look like a CEO to you? Camille stepped into Bexley's space, her fury radiant. What exactly does a CEO look like to you, Officer Bexley? Because right now, you look like a man who is going to be facing a multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit before the day is over. Bexley's hands trembled as he reached for his handcuff keys. His mind raced, searching desperately for a way to justify the encounter, spin the facts, and save his pension. I was just following protocol. He resisted. He refused to comply with a lawful order. Leave them on, Malcolm's voice cut through the panic. Bexley stopped, the key hovering an inch from the steel cuffs. He looked down at Malcolm, confused. Sir, I'm going to take these off. I said leave them on, Malcolm repeated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He shifted his weight and sat back on his heels, moving his bound wrists just enough to make certain the cuffs remained in place. You made an arrest, Officer Bexley. You radioed dispatch. You told them I was actively resisting. You created a permanent record of this interaction. If you take these cuffs off now, you'll simply lie in your report and call it a misunderstanding. I am not a misunderstanding. Malcolm looked at his branch manager. Camille, my phone is in my front pocket. Take it out. Camille immediately knelt beside Malcolm, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into his hoodie pocket and retrieved his sleek black smartphone. Unlock it, Malcolm instructed, providing his passcode. Go to my contacts. Look up Grant Holloway. At the sound of the name, Officer Bexley felt his stomach drop. Chief Grant Holloway headed the Westfield Police Department. Known for his zero-tolerance policy toward corruption, he had spent years searching for an airtight, legitimate reason to fire Bexley without triggering a war with the Union. Call him, Malcolm said quietly. Sir, please, Bexley begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. The towering bully from moments earlier had vanished, replaced by a terrified man staring into the full force of his own ruin. Please, let's just talk about this. I made a mistake. I didn't know who you were. That is exactly the point, officer, Malcolm said, his gaze boring into Bexley. You didn't know who I was? And if I had been anyone else, just an ordinary citizen coming in to cash a check, you would have ruined my life. You would have thrown me into a cell, charged me with resisting arrest, and let the system crush me just to protect your ego. Malcolm's voice grew colder and sharper. You didn't assault a CEO, Bexley. You assaulted a citizen. The fact that I am the CEO is simply the reason you are not going to get away with it. Camille put the phone on speaker and held it up. The phone rang twice before a deep, gruff voice answered. Malcolm, it's the weekend. You better not be calling to cancel our next golf tee time. Good morning, Grant, Malcolm said smoothly, ignoring the pain in his shoulders. I'm not canceling, but I am currently handcuffed on my knees on the floor of my own bank branch. One of your officers, a Mr. Warren Bexley, has just assaulted me and placed me under arrest for walking into my own building. A heavy, oppressive silence settled over the line. When Chief Holloway finally spoke, the jovial tone was completely gone. His voice was a quiet, lethal rumble. Malcolm, are you injured? Bruised, Malcolm replied, but fine. Officer Bexley has requested a transport unit. I'd appreciate it if you could be the one driving it. I'm leaving now, Chief Holloway said, the sound of a car engine roaring to life in the background. Put Bexley on the phone. Camille held the phone out toward the officer. Bexley stared at the glowing device as if it were a live grenade. He slowly reached out and took it, his hand visibly shaking. Chief, Bexley whispered. Warren, Chief Holloway said. The disgust in the chief's voice was palpable, even through the small speaker. You have a few moments to pray to whatever God you believe in before I get there. Do not speak to Mr. Sterling. Do not touch Mr. Sterling. You stand against the wall, you keep your mouth shut, and you prepare to hand over your badge. The line went dead. Bexley stood there in the center of the lavish lobby, the phone slipping from his sweaty grip and landing softly on the marble. He looked at the tellers, who were staring at him with a mix of shock and vindication. He looked at Camille, whose eyes promised total destruction. And finally, he looked down at the man he had judged, assaulted, and underestimated. Malcolm Sterling remained on his knees, his hands still cuffed behind his back, waiting patiently for the storm he had just summoned to arrive. The silence inside the Westfield branch of Harbor Trust and Company was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, shallow breathing of Officer Warren Bexley. He stood exactly where Chief Grant Holloway had ordered him to stand, flat against the cool Italian marble wall near the entrance, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He looked like a deflated balloon, the toxic force of his unchecked ego violently punctured by a single phone call. Malcolm Sterling remained on his knees in the center of the lobby, the steel handcuffs pinched brutally against the nerves in his wrists, sending sharp spikes of numbness down to his fingertips. Camille Prescott hovered inches away from him, her posture a rigid shield, her eyes locked onto Bexley with a glaring, unblinking intensity that promised absolute ruin. Behind the bullet-resistant glass, Tessa Monroe and the other tellers stood frozen. They were witnesses to a colossal shift in power. Only moments after the call went dead, the wail of a siren pierced the crisp autumn air outside. It wasn't the standard rising and falling siren of a patrol car. It was the deep, aggressive blare of an unmarked police SUV. Tires screeched violently against the pavement outside the heavy brass doors. Through the expansive front windows, everyone in the lobby watched as a black Ford Explorer slammed into the curb, its red and blue grille lights flashing with blinding urgency. The driver's side door flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Chief Grant Holloway stepped out. He was a formidable older man, possessing a sharp hawk-like gaze and an uncompromising posture forged from decades in law enforcement. He was wearing his weekend civilian clothes, khakis, and a navy blue windbreaker, but the gold shield clipped to his belt and the sheer radiant fury in his stride made him look more imposing than a SWAT team in full tactical gear. Holloway shoved the heavy brass doors open so hard they slammed against their stoppers, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vaulted lobby. He didn't look at the tellers. He didn't look at Camille. He completely ignored Bexley against the wall, his eyes locked immediately onto the CEO of the bank, kneeling on the floor in handcuffs. A dark, dangerous flush crept up Chief Holloway's neck. "Malcolm," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried across the room. He marched directly toward the center of the lobby, stopping right in front of Malcolm. "Grant," Malcolm replied evenly, looking up. "I appreciate the prompt response." Holloway finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over to the wall. "Bexley, keys, now." Bexley scrambled, his thick, clumsy fingers fumbling desperately at his utility belt. He yanked the small silver handcuff key free and practically sprinted the short distance to the chief, holding the key out as if it were a white flag of surrender. "Chief, listen to me. I was just... If you speak another word before I explicitly order you to, I will have you arrested for insubordination and obstruction of justice right here on this floor," Holloway snarled, snatching the key from Bexley's trembling hand. "Step back." Bexley recoiled as if he had been physically struck, retreating to his spot against the wall, the blood draining entirely from his face. Chief Holloway knelt behind Malcolm, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The mechanical click-clack of the handcuffs releasing sounded deafening in the quiet bank. Holloway gently guided the heavy steel bracelets off Malcolm's wrists. Malcolm slowly brought his arms forward, his face wincing slightly in pain. Deep, angry red indentations circled both of his wrists, already beginning to swell and bruise purple. Camille immediately handed him a tissue from a nearby desk, her eyes welling with sympathetic tears. But Malcolm waved it away. He rubbed his wrists, standing up slowly to his full height. He brushed the dust off his faded gray athletic hoodie, instantly transforming back from a detained suspect into the man who owned the room. "Are you injured, Malcolm?" Holloway asked again, his tone shifting to one of deep professional concern. "Do I need to call paramedics?" "No paramedics," Malcolm said, his voice returning to its sharp, commanding boardroom cadence. "But I want those bruises documented thoroughly." "Consider it done," Holloway said, standing up. He turned his attention back to Bexley. The chief's demeanor shifted from concerned friend to apex predator, his attention narrowing entirely on Bexley. He walked slowly toward the disgraced officer, stopping uncomfortably close. "Let me ensure I have a complete grasp of the situation," Holloway said softly, a tone far more terrifying than a shout. "I received a call that one of my veteran officers assaulted a prominent local business leader inside his own commercial property without cause." "Chief, I didn't know who he was," Bexley burst out, panic overriding the order to remain silent. Desperation saturated every syllable. He was wearing a hoodie. He bypassed the line. He tried to force his way into the back offices. He refused to show ID. I thought he was a threat to the bank. I was following the standard protocol for an uncooperative, unidentified suspect attempting unauthorized access. Bexley was clinging to the only lifeline he knew, the vague, subjective language of police handbooks designed to protect officers making split-second decisions. He was betting on the blue wall of silence, the unspoken rule that cops protect cops no matter what. Malcolm let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Standard protocol or standard prejudice?" Malcolm asked. He resisted. Bexley pointed a trembling finger at Malcolm, emboldened by pure self-preservation. He pulled away from me. He reached into his pocket. I had to use force to secure the scene. Any officer would have done exactly the same thing. Holloway did not flinch. He stared at Bexley with profound, unadulterated disgust. "You're telling me," Holloway said slowly, "that Mr. Sterling, a man with no criminal record who runs a multi-billion-dollar financial institution, actively fought you and reached into his pocket in a threatening manner?" "Yes," Bexley lied, nodding vigorously, his eyes wide with desperate conviction. "It's my word against his, Chief. I was protecting the bank." "Your word against his," Holloway repeated. He looked over his shoulder at Malcolm. Malcolm wasn't looking at the chief. He was looking up toward the vaulted ceiling. He pointed a long, steady finger at a sleek black dome-shaped camera mounted in the corner. Then he pointed to another above the teller stations and another directly over the mahogany writing desk where he had been slammed. "Officer Bexley," Malcolm said with icy, absolute certainty, "this is a bank. We hold tens of millions of dollars in liquid assets in the vault behind those frosted glass doors. Did you genuinely believe my security system consisted of nothing but your word?" Camille Prescott stepped forward, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, a triumphant, razor-sharp smile cutting across her face. "Actually, Chief Holloway," Camille intervened, "we upgraded our entire security matrix recently to comply with new federal banking regulations. We don't just have video." Bexley's stomach plummeted into an endless dark abyss. "We have full 4K resolution video covering every square inch of this lobby from 6 different angles," Camille continued, her voice echoing clearly. "And we have directional high-definition audio recording. Every whisper, every breath, and every lie you just told the chief is stored on a secure cloud-based server." The remaining color drained from Bexley's face. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death certificate. "Let's go to my office," Camille said, gesturing toward the frosted glass door. "I think we should all watch a movie." The back office of Harbor Trust and Company was a stark contrast to the classic grandeur of the lobby. It was a sleek, ultra-modern command center filled with ergonomic chairs, frosted glass partitions, and multiple high-resolution monitors. Malcolm Sterling sat at the head of a polished conference table, massaging his bruised wrists. Chief Holloway stood right behind him, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Officer Bexley stood near the door, flanked by 2 more Westfield police officers who had arrived shortly after the chief. Holloway had ordered them to flank Bexley, silently treating the veteran cop not as a colleague, but as a suspect in custody. Camille Prescott sat at the primary terminal, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced speed. She pulled up the bank's proprietary security software. "Pull up camera 3, the one positioned over the writing desk," Malcolm instructed quietly, "and sync the audio from the central lobby microphone." "Syncing now," Camille confirmed. A massive 80-inch flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. The high-definition footage was terrifyingly clear. It showed the lobby in vibrant, crisp detail. There was Malcolm walking through the doors in his gray hoodie. There was Bexley leaning against the desk, his body language instantly shifting from relaxed to aggressive the moment Malcolm stepped inside. Camille clicked a button, and the audio filled the room, crisp and undeniable. "Hey, you, hold it right there." Bexley's voice boomed from the speakers. The people in the room watched in suffocating silence as the digital encounter played out. They heard Malcolm's calm, measured responses. They heard him explicitly state his identity, his purpose, and his impending meeting with Camille Prescott. They heard him offer a simple, rational solution: call the branch manager. And then they watched Bexley snap. The 4K footage captured every damning nuance. It captured the exact moment Bexley's hand clamped down on Malcolm's shoulder. It captured Malcolm standing perfectly still, his hands visible, making no aggressive movements whatsoever. "He's reaching," the digital Bexley shouted on screen. Simultaneously, the video clearly showed Malcolm's hand slowly moving toward his pocket to retrieve his phone. His body remained relaxed, presenting no physical threat. Then came the violence. The room watched as Bexley forcefully shoved Malcolm into the heavy mahogany desk. The microphones picked up the loud, sickening thud of Malcolm's ribs hitting the wood. They captured Malcolm's sharp hiss of pain as his arm was brutally twisted behind his back. The footage also showed Bexley forcefully driving his knee into the back of Malcolm's legs to force him to the marble floor. "Do not resist! Stop resisting!" the recorded Bexley yelled. Yet the video unequivocally showed Malcolm completely limp, utterly compliant, offering not a single ounce of physical resistance while being manhandled. The video ended with Bexley's smug, terrifyingly racist remark echoing through the high-definition speakers. "You picked the wrong town, buddy. We don't tolerate your kind of nonsense in Westfield." Camille paused the video on the frame of Bexley, smirking down at the handcuffed CEO. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a career being completely, irrevocably destroyed. Chief Holloway closed his eyes for a long, agonizing moment, pinching the bridge of his nose. The vein in his neck was throbbing visibly. When he finally opened his eyes and turned to Bexley, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "You lied," Holloway said. The two words were spoken with such quiet, lethal disappointment that they struck harder than a physical blow. "You assaulted a compliant citizen. You escalated a nonviolent encounter into a physical altercation. You falsified your reason for detention over the police radio. Then you stood before your commanding officer and lied to cover up your own gross incompetence and prejudice." Bexley was shaking uncontrollably. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Chief, please. I've given decades to this department. You can't just, this was a lapse in judgment. I want to call my union representative." "You can call whoever you want, Warren," Holloway said, stepping forward until he was inches from Bexley's face. "But the union cannot protect you from felony assault charges." Bexley gasped, his eyes widening in pure horror. "Felony? You unlawfully detained and assaulted a man causing bodily injury under color of law." Malcolm Sterling spoke up from the table, his voice sharp and unyielding. "My attorneys are already drafting the paperwork. I am not suing the city, Bexley. I am not suing the police department. Chief Holloway runs a fine department, and I will not let your actions taint the officers who actually do their jobs correctly." Malcolm stood up, walking slowly toward the terrified officer. "I am suing you," Malcolm said, pointing directly at Bexley's chest. "I am suing you in civil court for intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, and civil rights violations. I am going after your house. I am going after your savings. And when the district attorney sees this 4K video, criminal charges will follow. That precious pension you have spent your career counting on will be stripped away the moment you are convicted of a felony." You can't do that," Bexley stammered, tears of sheer panic spilling from his eyes. "My pension, my wife." "You should have thought about your wife before you decide to play judge, jury, and executioner in my lobby," Malcolm replied coldly, offering zero empathy. "You thought you had absolute power over me because of how I looked. You are about to find out what absolute power actually looks like." Chief Holloway held out his hand, palm up. "Badge and gun, Bexley, right now," Holloway ordered. Bexley's hands trembled violently as he unclipped his holster, handing over his department-issued firearm to the officer beside him. He then slowly, painfully unpinned the silver star from his chest, the badge he had hidden behind for decades while bullying the vulnerable, and placed it in the chief's waiting palm. "Officer Pierce," Holloway said to the officer on Bexley's right, "escort Mr. Bexley to a holding cell at the precinct. He is officially suspended without pay, pending an immediate internal affairs investigation and criminal referral to the district attorney." "Chief, please, let me call Leon Barrett at the union," Bexley begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob as the reality of his destroyed life crashed over him. "Go ahead," Holloway said, gesturing toward the phone on the conference table. "Call Leon, put him on speaker. Let's see how eager the union is to defend this." Bexley practically lunged for the phone, dialing the union representative's emergency weekend number with shaking fingers. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Leon Barrett. Leon, It's Warren Bexley. You gotta help me. They're taking my badge. They're talking about felonies. You gotta get down here to Harbor Trust right now." There was a pause on the line. Then Leon's voice came back, sounding incredibly weary. "Warren, I just got off the phone with the DA's office. They already received a direct call from Malcolm Sterling's high-powered legal team. They forwarded a clip of the security footage." "Leon, it's out of context. You have to fight this for me." "Warren," Leon said, all sympathy draining from his voice, "I saw the tape. You assaulted the bank's CEO for wearing a sweatshirt. You lied on the radio. You lied to the chief. The union provides legal defense for officers acting within the scope of their duties. Committing a racially motivated felony assault on camera is not within the scope of your duties." Bexley's breath hitched. "Leon, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you're on your own, Warren. Do not call this number again." Click. The dial tone echoed loudly in the sleek modern office, sounding like the final, flatlining heartbeat of Warren Bexley's decades-long career. The dial tone blared from the conference room speaker, a harsh, monotonous screech that signaled the absolute end of Warren Bexley's decades-long reign of intimidation. Camille Prescott reached over and calmly pressed the disconnect button. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than before. Bexley's knees visibly buckled. If Officer Nolan Pierce hadn't instinctively reached out to grab his bicep, the massive, imposing officer would have collapsed onto the plush carpet. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving behind a sickly ashen gray. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. The invincible shield of the blue wall had evaporated, leaving him entirely exposed to the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the justice system he had so frequently weaponized against others. "Turn around, Warren," Officer Nolan Pierce ordered. There was no sympathy in the younger cop's voice. Pierce had worked under Bexley's toxic shadow for years, enduring his bigoted remarks and outdated, aggressive tactics. Pierce had always kept his head down, fearing retaliation. Now he was the one holding the power. Bexley didn't move. He simply stared blankly at the floor, trapped in stunned, catatonic silence. "I said turn around and put your hands behind your back," Pierce repeated, his voice hardening into a sharp command. He forcefully spun Bexley around. The metallic click, click, click of the handcuffs ratcheting securely around Bexley's wrists echoed off the frosted glass walls. It was a poetic, brutal symmetry. Earlier, Bexley had forcefully applied those exact restraints to an innocent man to feed his own ego. Now they bound his own hands. Securing his downfall, Chief Holloway stepped back, his posture rigid. "Read him his rights, Pierce. Textbook. I don't want a single procedural error on this arrest. If he so much as breathes incorrectly on the way to the cruiser, you document it." "Yes, Chief," Pierce replied. He grabbed Bexley by the tricep. "Warren Bexley, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda warning filled the room, Malcolm Sterling watched with cold, calculating detachment. He rubbed his deeply bruised wrists, feeling the throbbing pain, but his mind was already several steps ahead. He wasn't just going to fire this man or see him locked up. He was going to use this moment to set an inescapable, highly public precedent. "Take him out through the front," Malcolm commanded quietly, his voice cutting through Pierce's recitation. Holloway looked at Malcolm, a silent question in his eyes. Standard protocol for an arrested officer was usually a discreet exit through a back door or loading dock to avoid public spectacle. "He wanted an audience," Malcolm said, meeting Holloway's gaze. "He humiliated me in the center of my own lobby, in front of my employees and customers, because it made him feel powerful. He does not get the privilege of a quiet exit. Take him out through the front door." Holloway nodded slowly, acknowledging the absolute justice in the request. "You heard the man, Pierce. Straight through the main lobby." The frosted glass door swung open. Officer Nolan Pierce marched the handcuffed, disgraced veteran out into the expansive, marble-floored expanse of Harbor Trust and Company. The lobby had completely frozen. Word had quickly spread among the staff, and the few customers who had witnessed the initial assault had lingered near the entrance, held there by grim fascination after the arrival of the chief of police. When Bexley emerged, stripped of his badge, stripped of his gun, and restrained in steel cuffs, a collective audible gasp rippled through the room. Tessa Monroe, the young teller who had been terrified to tears earlier, stood up straight behind the bullet-resistant glass. The sheer vindication on her face mirrored the feelings of everyone present. Bexley kept his chin tucked to his chest, unable to make eye contact with a single person. The man who had strutted through the town like an untouchable sheriff was now shuffling across the Italian marble like a broken shell of the man he had pretended to be. Every heavy footstep echoed through the high vaulted ceiling, broadcasting his disgrace. Malcolm Sterling followed a few paces behind, walking shoulder to shoulder with Chief Holloway. Malcolm's posture was impeccable. He didn't gloat, he didn't smile, he simply walked with the quiet, terrifying presence of a king who had just swiftly and cleanly executed a traitor in the courtyard. As Pierce pushed Bexley through the heavy brass doors and out into the crisp autumn air toward the waiting patrol car, Chief Holloway stopped at the threshold. "Malcolm," Holloway said, his gruff voice softening slightly, "I want to personally apologize on behalf of my department and the city. What happened today is a disgrace to the badge. I've been trying to build a case against him for years, but the union, they always protected him. They aren't protecting him anymore, Grant." Malcolm watched the cruiser door slam shut, trapping Bexley in the back seat. "But an apology isn't what I'm looking for. Rot like Bexley's does not exist in a vacuum. It festers because the system allows it." "I know." Holloway sighed, suddenly looking much older than before. "The district attorney is going to throw the book at him. I'll make sure of it." "Good," Malcolm said, "because my legal team will be watching every single move the district attorney makes. Have a good weekend, Chief." Malcolm turned on his heel and walked back toward his office. There were compliance documents that still needed his signature. Soon afterward, the legal avalanche Malcolm Sterling had promised was already in motion. Sebastian Rowe, a ruthless civil rights attorney with the instincts of an apex predator, hired by Malcolm, didn't just file a lawsuit. He dropped a thermonuclear legal bomb on the city of Westfield and Warren Bexley. The lawsuit bypassed the usual bureaucratic delays, directly targeting Bexley's personal assets under federal civil rights statutes that pierce standard qualified immunity, especially after the police union officially withdrew its protection. Simultaneously, District Attorney Conrad Shaw, terrified of the PR nightmare of having a billionaire CEO publicly accuse his office of sheltering a racist cop, moved with unprecedented speed. Bexley was officially arraigned shortly afterward. There was no leniency, no professional courtesy. He was charged with felony aggravated assault under color of law, felony false reporting to law enforcement, and official misconduct. The local news media had obtained a strategically leaked, pixelated still frame from the bank's 4K security footage. It showed a massive uniformed officer violently shoving a black man in a hoodie against a desk. The headline across the Westfield Chronicle read, "Rogue Cop Assaults Bank CEO. Chief Fires Veteran on the Spot." Bexley's life disintegrated rapidly. In a desperate bid to avoid serving hard time in a state penitentiary, Bexley's newly appointed public defender brokered a plea deal. Bexley pleaded guilty to the felony assault charge. Judge Everett Vaughn, a man known for his strict interpretation of the law, didn't hold back during the sentencing. "Mr. Bexley," Judge Vaughn's voice boomed through the packed courtroom, "you were entrusted with the safety and dignity of the citizens of this city. Instead, you allowed your own malignant prejudices to dictate your actions. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wore. You are sentenced to a multi-year term in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by years of strict probation. But the prison sentence wasn't the final blow. Because Bexley had been convicted of a felony committed while on duty, the State Pension Board convened an emergency administrative hearing. By unanimous vote, the board invoked the forfeiture clause, dissolving Bexley's lucrative, long-earned police pension. The nest egg he and his wife had been counting on for their entire retirement was legally dissolved, stripped away forever. The civil suit filed by Sebastian Rowe completely wiped out the rest. Facing total bankruptcy, Bexley was forced to liquidate his assets, selling his suburban home and depleting his life savings just to settle the lawsuit and pay his mounting legal debts. Malcolm Sterling did not keep a single cent of the settlement money. Later, Malcolm stood at a podium in the grand lobby of Harbor Trust and Company, dressed not in a hoodie, but in a perfectly tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit. The lobby was packed with local business leaders, city council members, and reporters. Chief Holloway stood respectfully near the front row. "Power," Malcolm said into the microphone, his resonant voice filling the marble room. is a revealing force. It does not change who you are. It simply magnifies it. Not long ago, a man with a badge stood in this exact room and used his power to humiliate, assault, and discriminate. He believed his power was absolute. He was wrong. Cameras flashed, illuminating the polished mahogany desk where Malcolm had been violently pinned. But true justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, Malcolm continued, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. It's about dismantling the environment that allowed them to thrive. The civil settlement I received from former Officer Bexley will not go into my bank account. Instead, Harbor Trust and Company is establishing a permanent $2 million endowment. The crowd murmured in surprise. This endowment, Malcolm announced, will be managed in partnership with Chief Holloway and the Westfield Police Department. It will fund mandatory, rigorous, and continuous de-escalation and implicit bias training for every officer in this county. Furthermore, it will establish a full-ride scholarship program for underprivileged minority students pursuing degrees in criminal justice and constitutional law. We are going to flood the system with educated, empathetic, principled leaders. Applause erupted in the lobby. It was deafening. Camille Prescott stood near the vault doors, beaming with immense pride. Tessa Monroe clapped until her hands stung. Malcolm Sterling had taken a moment of profound ugliness and transformed it into a force for the greater good. He had ensured that Warren Bexley's legacy would not be one of fear, but rather the catalyst that ultimately cleansed the department of the very bigotry Bexley represented. Much later, on a quiet weekend morning, the Westfield branch was peaceful. The early spring sunlight streamed through the massive front windows, illuminating the Italian marble. The heavy brass doors swung open. Malcolm Sterling walked in. He was wearing a faded, comfortably worn gray athletic hoodie, dark denim jeans, and a pair of scuffed running shoes. He had just finished a 6-mile run and needed to sign some documents for Camille. He bypassed the velvet ropes of the main teller line entirely. Near the front entrance, standing by the high-top mahogany desk, was a young, newly appointed police officer working the weekend security detail. The officer saw a tall black man in a hoodie bypass the line and head straight for the restricted back offices. The young officer didn't reach for his belt. He didn't shout. He stood up straight, offering a polite, professional nod. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," the young officer said respectfully. "Ms. Prescott is expecting you in the back." Malcolm paused, looking at the young cop. He recognized him as one of the first recipients of the new training protocol funded by the endowment. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of Malcolm's mouth. The system wasn't perfect yet. It never would be. But today, in this room, the invisible crown he wore was recognized not by the clothes on his back, but by the undeniable weight of the respect he commanded. "Thank you, officer," Malcolm replied smoothly. He pulled open the frosted glass door and walked into his empire, untouched and permanently victorious. What a phenomenal end to an intense real-life saga. Malcolm Sterling didn't just survive a terrifying encounter with a corrupt cop. He used his immense power and intellect to completely dismantle the system protecting him. Officer Bexley thought he was untouchable, but he learned the hard way that true authority doesn't come from a badge. It comes from integrity. If you loved watching justice being served cold, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. Let us know in the comments, do you think Bexley got what he deserved?